My parents kicked me out in 11th grade for getting my girlfriend pregnant. They said I'd ruined the family name, that I wasn't their son anymore. I remember standing in the rain with a trash bag full of clothes, hearing the lock click behind me like a sentence. I thought that night was the end of my life. But 22 years later, they showed up at my door in Asheville, smiling like nothing ever happened. My father's first words, "Let us see the child." My mother's eyes searched the room as if she'd find forgiveness hiding there. I just looked at them calm after decades of silence and said the only truth that could cut as deep as their rejection. "What child? What are you talking about?" The color drained from their faces. That was the moment everything I'd built for 22 years finally came full circle. I'm Kepler Voss, and this is the story of what happens when the family that erased you comes back for something that was never theirs. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If this kind of story moves you, stories about justice, heartbreak, and finding strength after betrayal, please subscribe. Your support means I'm not telling this alone. The clock in our dining room struck 7 as the rain pressed against the windows, steady and merciless. It was 2003, Eugene, Oregon, one of those wet winters that made every argument sound heavier. My name is Kepler Voss, 17 years old. And that night I learned that family could throw you out faster than the rain could wash your footsteps away. The dinner table was set like any other night, walnut wood gleaming under the chandelier, the family photo centered above the fireplace, the smell of pot roast still hanging in the air. My mother Marilyn folded napkins as if precision could hold the world together. My father Caleb still wore his steel watch, the one that ticked louder than his voice even at home. I had rehearsed what to say a dozen times that afternoon, thinking that honesty might count for something. When I told them Alara Quinn was pregnant, the air didn't move. My father looked at me like I'd confessed to a crime. "You ruined the family name," he said flatly. "Do you even understand what you've done?" My voice cracked, but I forced the words out anyway. "We'll take responsibility. I just need to finish school." I hoped there would be a sliver of mercy, some acknowledgement that I was still their son. Instead, Caleb slammed his hand against the table, the plates jumping, his eyes sharp and cold. "You have 10 minutes, he said, ripping a check for $100 from his wallet. "Take this and leave." My mother didn't shout. That would have been too human. She reached for the framed photo on the mantel and turned it face down. The soft click of the glass meeting wood sounded final, like a door closing on my name. "We'll pray for you," she whispered. But even that sounded like a formality for the benefit of the walls. As I stood frozen, my father's phone buzzed. He walked to his office and I caught fragments of his words. "Use the 1989 template. Yes, notarized." He shut the door and the metallic gleam of his watch caught the hallway light, one last flash before I turned away. Outside, the rain came harder. I stood under the porch, watching through the window as they sat back down to eat as if nothing had changed. My jacket stuck to my skin, my hands numb around the strap of my backpack. I didn't cry, not then. There's a kind of silence that doesn't break, it hardens. I carried with me a cheap nylon bag, a few clothes, and the woven bracelet Alara had made from a green vine string. It was the only thing that still felt alive. I looked back once, only once, and swore I would never step inside that house again. I wouldn't apologize for loving her. I wouldn't beg to be their son. I'd build something so strong they'd never be allowed to enter. The thunder rolled as I walked down the street, shoes filling with water. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a message from Alara. It was just a single streak of blue paint, her favorite color, and a set of coordinates, the Portland bus station. I didn't hesitate. I ran through the rain, the night swallowing every trace of home behind me. By the time I reached Portland, it was past 2 a.m. The Greyhound station smelled like metal diesel and hopelessness. My clothes were still damp, and I hadn't eaten since noon. The diner across the street was half empty, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Open 24 hours. Inside, the light was harsh. The coffee burnt the linoleum floor, shining like a mirror that didn't want to reflect anyone. I sank into a corner booth, my backpack at my feet, my phone in my hand. Alara's coordinates had led me here, but the line rang to voicemail every time. The last time I tried, a man answered and said coldly, "Delete this number." Then silence. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, someone had set a bowl of soup in front of me. "You'll catch pneumonia if you keep sleeping like that," a woman's voice said. She looked around 60, wearing a dark wool coat that had seen winters of its own. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "Do you have a family?" she asked. I hesitated. "Not anymore." She nodded slowly as if she'd expected that answer. "Then you have two choices, stand up or stay down. What's it going to be?" Her name was Maeve Harlow, and within an hour she'd given me a job washing dishes at her small motel, the Magnolia Inn. "It's not charity," she warned me. "It's a trade. You work. You eat. You don't steal. You don't lie." I took the deal. That night I scrubbed plates until my fingers pruned the sound of water hitting metal, almost drowning out the noise in my head. Every shift felt like a punishment I deserved, but Maeve watched me carefully, not like a judge, more like someone testing whether I'd break or bend. On my second night, she brought me a cup of tea and asked what had driven me here. I told her the truth in one line: my girlfriend's pregnant. She didn't gasp or offer a sermon. She just said, "Then you know what it means to love something the world calls a mistake." When she walked away, I realized it was the first time anyone had spoken to me without disgust since that night. Weeks passed and I learned the rhythm of the inn. The creak of the hallway at midnight, the smell of detergent on fresh sheets, the way guests carried their secrets in their suitcases. Maeve taught me to listen, to hear what people didn't say. "Most guests don't pay for a room," she said one evening. "They pay to be invisible." I started taking notes, inventory check-ins, complaints. There was a strange peace in routine, even when it was built from survival. One night, Maeve led me to a small storage room behind her office. "Come here," she said, opening an old safe built into the wall. Inside were stacks of papers, yellowed brittle. "You're not the first one who got erased by family," she told me. She showed me a file, court documents about her own child taken by her late husband's family decades ago. "I didn't save mine in time," she whispered. "But maybe I can help you save yourself." That was the first time she smiled. Then she handed me a different document, one freshly printed, sharp black ink on white paper. "Look at this," she said. It was a legal form titled Relinquishment of Parental Rights, drafted by an attorney named Jonas Creed. "This is what some parents sign to cut their children off, to protect their reputation." Her eyes locked on mine. "If they ever signed one for you, you hold the power. They think they erased you, but all they did was leave a record of their betrayal." The words hit me harder than any rainstorm. Caleb's phone call. The phrase template from '89. The sealed envelope I'd seen that night. It wasn't just a threat, it was paperwork. Proof. I saw Maeve's own draft of a will on her desk, unfinished, a single line underlined in blue: "Reward for the one who never gives up." That night, lying on a clean bed for the first time in weeks, I stared at the ceiling fan and promised I wouldn't. I'd find Alara. I'd find the truth about what my parents had done. At dawn, the motel phone rang. Maeve answered, her face tightening. She handed me the receiver. The voice on the other end was low, almost robotic. "Alara has left Oregon," it said. Then after a pause, "Idaho." The line went dead. Outside, the sky began to lighten, but all I could feel was the chill creeping back into my bones. Somewhere out there, the girl I loved was being moved like a secret, and the people who called themselves my parents were already rewriting the story. I didn't know it yet, but that call was the beginning of everything that would define the rest of my life. The office behind the Magnolia front desk was barely wider than the copier, but it felt like a command center to me. A whiteboard leaned on a crooked nail marker, lines mapping shifts, laundry runs, vendor deliveries. I stopped bussing tables and started running the overnight crew, counting drawers at 5 a.m., reconciling the till, learning why a missing receipt is never just a mistake. Maeve let me move a battered metal desk under the tiny window. On it, I kept a ledger, a stack of employment forms, and a printout of state ID requirements. Money on the books meant a paper trail. A paper trail meant I was real, at least somewhere. My goal was simple and impossible at the same time: earn enough to breathe. Get my name on legal documents that couldn't be turned face down, and study every quiet lever that moves people, contracts, data, and whatever sits between a camera and the story it tells. Maeve said power is mostly housekeeping with better stationery. I believed her because she could make a city inspector smile while handing him a citation he had written. She introduced me to Jonas Creed on a rainless afternoon that felt wrong for Portland. He was tall, gray at the temples, shoes clean, voice patient. Multi-state notary, she said, and the kind of attorney who reads the fine print and then asks who wrote it. We shook hands in the hall beside rolling carts stacked with clean towels. He asked me for dates. I gave him the night, the hour, the table, the check, the way my father's watch flashed when he picked up the phone. Jonas wrote each detail like it was a coordinate on a map. He'd file public records requests in Lane County, he said, and look for anything filed by a C. Voss within 48 hours of that dinner. He didn't raise my hopes. He measured them. That same week, Maeve brought in a young woman with sleepless eyes and a laptop that looked like it never shut. "This is Sarah Wren," she said. Sarah installed a new POS that actually balanced, taught me how logs work, how every keystroke creates a trail. She showed me permission tiers and why no one should ever share a login, then smiled and reset my password when I forgot it on day 2. She talked about mirroring servers and hash checks like she was reading poems. The thing I remember most was this: if you can prove what happened, you don't have to raise your voice. In the evenings, I practiced writing emails that said exactly what I meant and nothing I didn't. I learned to attach the right documents to label files like they might one day sit in a courtroom. When I drafted staff contracts, Maeve would cross out adjectives. No color, she'd say just facts. The more I erased, the more protected I felt. Sarah taught me to build a repository, the way a carpenter builds a frame: permits in one folder, evidence in another, witness corroboration in a third, with a cross-index that would let a stranger understand the flow in 10 minutes. I named the top directory Aster, at her suggestion short for a star that navigators used to find home. We labeled the subfolders with dates, not feelings. Every upload got a checksum. Every entry could stand up to a bad faith reader. Jonas returned with a thin smile and a scan of a docket number. There had been an appointment at a Eugene notary the morning after I left. The requester was listed only as C. Voss. The body of the document was sealed, but the number existed. He slid the printout across my desk like a matchbook. "We don't have the fire yet," he said, "but we know where the tinder sits." He explained relinquishment letters, dry words for something wet and permanent. Parents sometimes use them to cut a child loose and protect themselves from liability. They forget the paper keeps breathing long after a prayer circle stops. I told him about the phone call, about the phrase my father used the 1989 template, and about the envelope with a raised seal. Jonas nodded and told me to be patient. "If you collect interest on resentment," he said, "you'll go broke. Let them compound their mistakes instead." That night, the Magnolia phone rang just as I was closing the drawer. The caller ID read private. A man said, "Forget it. You don't have a baby." His voice was almost bored. "Who is this?" I asked. He hung up. I stood there staring at the receiver like it might give me a second chance to ask better. Maeve found me on the steps behind the laundry room where the air smelled like warm cotton and bleach. She didn't ask what the call was. She brought a camcorder case, the old kind, with a broken clasp, and placed a mini DV tape in my palm. "I recorded this the week I buried my illusions," she said. "Play it when you need to remember why we keep going." In the video, she sat at her kitchen table, speaking to a lens the way you speak to a friend who won't lie. Family is the one who doesn't leave. If they left, they get the title back only if you choose it. "Show this where the light is bright," she said. "Keep your eyes steady. The world blinks enough for both of you." A few days later, Jonas called from his office. He mentioned a past client who had washed his surname with a paid narrative campaign, a PR outfit that cleans family messes and sells them back as miracles. He gave me the name and said it might circle back someday. Sarah and I were labeling a new batch of files when she looked up and asked if I liked stars. I told her I liked the idea of things that stay put. Then every sensitive file gets an Aster tag, she said. We'll speak the same language when it matters. I realized then that revenge wasn't a storming of gates. It was municipal work. It was drafting, stamping, filing, logging. It was building scaffolding around a truth and letting gravity do the rest. I started a document on the whiteboard and then on my laptop titled simply The Blueprint. 3 sections. Law, data, story. Under law, I listed dockets, notarizations, chain of custody. Under data logs, IP traces, audit trails. Under story, what happened, who watched, what can be shown. When I finished, my hands had stopped shaking. Right before closing, an email hit the Magnolia inbox from a throwaway address. Subject line. She was forced to leave. There was a single attachment, the photo of a clinic sign in Idaho, grainy but legible. I felt the floor tilt. Jonas told me to save it to Aster and say nothing else. Silence isn't surrender, he said. It's strategy. They'll come to you when hunger outweighs pride. I nodded, dragged the file to the repository and stared at the blinking cursor, the most patient metronome on earth. I fell asleep at the desk that night, the camcorder tape tucked into a drawer, the word Aster glowing on the screen like a lighthouse with its light reduced to 1 pixel. Outside, the delivery truck's brakes sighed, and somewhere above the roofline a plane cut a quiet line across the dark. I didn't know where Alara was. I didn't know exactly what my parents had signed. But I knew I had a map, and I knew I would follow it until the pins connected and the picture made itself. Asheville, North Carolina, 2025. The glass walls of my place threw morning light across the floor in long, cold bars. I was marking phrases in the notes for my Avalon Summit talk when the doorbell stuttered like someone nervous about their own insistence. I muted the music, set the mug down, and walked the length of the room. The mountains stood steady beyond the balcony. My hand didn't shake when I opened the door. Caleb and Marilyn filled the doorway with the same posture they'd used in every church lobby of my childhood. My mother held an iPad angled away from the sun, a headline visible in the glare, Kepler Voss, founder of Aster AI, father to prodigy. They were dressed like apology, but their eyes flickered with calculation. My father spoke first. We're here to see the child. He didn't look at my face when he said it. My mother's gaze skimmed the entryway as if forgiveness might be hiding behind the umbrella stand. What child? I asked. I never had one. The silence that followed lasted 13 seconds. I counted because counting kept me from laughing, and laughter would have been cruel to the boy who stood in the rain 22 years ago. They asked to step inside. I let them. Sarah's system engaged the moment the door closed. A small chime in my watch vibrated to confirm the house was recording. I walked them through the living room and used the remote to wake the wall display, letting the Aster dashboard rise, then the product branch stamped Aster Jr. Their eyes went to it like moths. We've forgiven a lot, my father said. It's time to be a family again. We want to meet him. We can share the future, Kepler. I poured coffee and looked at my mother's hands. She wore my father's steel watch today, the one I had watched flash in a hallway when I was 17. Its face caught the morning and threw it back like a signal flare. Where is he? My mother asked too brightly. The boy is with people who believed me when you didn't, I said. He's safe. It wasn't a lie. The boy was a product and a promise, not a person. And for the first time in my life, I was grateful for a misunderstanding I could steer. They started talking about second chances, about how the past was complicated, about how God restores what is broken. I let them speak until their words lost their meaning. Then I asked what had changed. My father said something about markets and timing. Then he said too much. A story like this could help repair what happened in Oregon. He caught himself, but the sentence was already in the room breathing. They referenced a firm they'd retained to help share the reunion, a group out of Charlotte called Silverline Media. My mother slid a glossy deck from her bag, choreography for a miracle. She kept her voice soft, like she didn't want to frighten the animal she hoped to leash. I nodded, careful to look neither eager nor angry. I wanted them to keep thinking they were the ones holding a leash. When I stood to refill their cups, I used the reflection in the kettle to capture a clean shot of the watch on my mother's wrist. The photograph landed in my camera roll like a fossil proof that time repeats itself when no one tells it not to. They stayed 20 minutes and said very kind things in very careful voices. When they left, my father forgot a folder tucked beneath the iPad. Inside was a draft titled Grandparent Rights Petition Draft A. The language was predictably tender, the remedies very specific. I set the folder on the counter and called Jonas. I sent him the watch photo and a scan of the cover sheet. He called back almost instantly. The petition hadn't been filed yet. If they did file, they'd be tying a bow on their own plan. Document everything he said. And keep the audio rolling. I called Sarah and told her to start a watch on any Oregon-based IP that hit my name alongside the word grandson. She set filters and alerts and pushed a small update to my phone. An hour later, while I was rinsing cups, the phone buzzed. Then again. She read the searches to me out loud. How to claim inheritance from estranged child. Grandparent visitation in North Carolina. The last entry made me lean against the counter. An email to a familiar address, Derek Sloan. I hadn't seen that name on a screen in 2 decades. In my mind, he was still 17, whispering promises under bleachers and then vanishing into a lawyer's letterhead. Now he was a line in a log file reaching back toward the story he had abandoned. I walked onto the balcony and let the cold air burn my lungs. Below the road curved toward town, a bright thread stitching the hills together. I thought about the boy I used to be, about the way the lock sounded that night, about the blue paint streak on my phone screen. I thought about Maeve's video sitting in a folder labeled Astor Story, and the docket number sitting under Astor Law, and the access logs collecting under Astor Data, all together forming something you could put on a screen and not look away from. I didn't slam the door or throw the folder or call them back to fight in my living room. I went back inside and opened the repository and typed the day's entries, who came, what they said, what they left behind. In my mind, I heard Jonas's voice, don't spend resentment. Earn proof. I saved the file, watched the checksum confirm, and let the weight in my chest settle into patience. That night, as the glass turned black and the city lights stitched a loose net across the valley, I rewrote the first paragraph of my Avalon talk. I removed half the adjectives and one metaphor and left only the thing I could swear to trust has a version number, and once you downgrade it, it never upgrades itself. When I was done, the cursor waited at the end of the line like a held breath. My phone lit up once more. Sarah again. She had a screenshot of a draft press release from Silverline Media queued in a private workspace. The headline was the kind that gets shared without being read all the way through. She also had something else, a trace of a calendar invitation between my father and Derek, scheduled for the end of the week. Location Asheville. Subject reunion strategy. I put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling until the joists came into focus. In the morning, the mountains would be there, same as always. The doorbell might ring again. The watch might flash in my mother's sleeve a second time. But this time, the house was listening. The paper was breathing, and the names at the bottom of other people's documents were starting to mean exactly what they had signed. A week after they stood on my doorstep, the world around me seemed too quiet. The glass office I'd built at the top of the ridge was meant for sunlight and certainty, but that morning both felt artificial. Charts glowed on the curved wall display, a shifting ocean of lines and numbers. On my desk lay a letter written in my mother's narrow hand. You are still our blood. Think about the child. I folded it once neatly like something to file in the evidence drawer. The ink still smelled fresh. They were moving fast. They thought I was ready to forgive. They were wrong. The goal now was simple. Pull, don't push. Let them step so deep into their own illusion that the weight of greed would drag them under. Sarah was already tracing the network behind Silverline Media. Each ping, each log, and each attachment was logged in our database. That afternoon, she found what I'd expected, a thread of emails between Caleb and Derek Sloan, the man who had vanished from Alara's life and mine. His tone was oily and familiar. If Kepler has a child, I have a claim. You said you could prove it. I leaned back and exhaled. They weren't just rewriting my history, they were fabricating lineage, turning shame into inheritance. By nightfall, the full picture emerged. Caleb was pitching a redemption story. Derek would play the repentant father, my parents the heartbroken grandparents. The product was sympathy, and the currency was exposure. I let the disgust settle into calculation. Sarah tracked the payment path. Derek's account in the Cayman Islands was active again. A wire from an Oregon construction firm listed under my father's holdings had landed just 3 days before the PR deal began. His startup was dust. He needed the money. Jonas called from Portland, his voice calm, but I could hear the smile. He'd located a certified copy of a notary entry from 2003, my father's signature on a document renouncing all parental rights to me and any descendants. It was dry, bureaucratic, and devastatingly permanent. "It's their undoing," Jonas said. "When the time comes, we show it." I crafted my next move. Late that night, I wrote an email to my mother, its edges trembling with false vulnerability. "I need time. I want to believe you, but I don't know how. I'm afraid of losing everything." The bait had to look soft, almost tender. She answered at dawn, promising prayers and reconciliation. It was working. 3 days later, Silverline Media released the first wave. My feed exploded with the headline, "The Voss family reunites after 22 years of silence." The photograph attached was a digital graphed Caleb's arm across my shoulders, our smiles too symmetrical. Within an hour, Jonas had filed an ownership claim for the image and begun preparing an injunction. The firm deleted the post, but the algorithm kept it alive. Their fingerprints were everywhere now. Deletion only proved intent. I stood by the glass wall that night, the city a scatter of white under thin snow. For a moment I saw their faces again, those same performances of sorrow they wore when I begged to stay in that house years ago. For the first time I wondered if my own strategy was starting to sound like theirs. Jonas must have heard it in my voice when I called. "Justice and revenge use the same tools," he said. "The difference is where you stop." The next day my father called. The background hum of his office carried through the line. "The boy has a right to know who he is," he said, carefully measured. I waited a beat. "You're right," I said, "and I have the right to know why you gave me up. Let's discuss it publicly." The silence that followed was longer than 13 seconds this time. Then the call ended. I knew the Avalon Summit would no longer be a showcase for Aster AI. It would be the reckoning. Jonas and Sarah spent the next week preparing. Jonas drafted timing cues for when the notary file would appear. Sarah coded the stream with redundancies that no one could override. I recorded every call, every slip, every confession. When Caleb's voice rasped, "You owe me the Voss name," I saved the file as a sound marker for the presentation. As the first real snow of winter began to fall, I stood by the window and thought of the boy in Eugene who once counted thunder between seconds. The storm then had been raw. This one was designed. I whispered to the reflection, "They knocked once. Now I answer." That night, Sarah's alert pinged. "Derek Sloan just booked a flight to Asheville," she said. "He's not alone." On the screen, passenger data scrolled. The name hit like a ghost crawling out of a sealed grave, Alara Quinn. The city was gray and low that afternoon, a haze clinging to the hills like breath on cold glass. Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. Derek Sloan and Alara Quinn had checked into the Haven Hotel downtown, one of our pilot properties, using Aster's newest management system. My hand tightened around the railing as I opened the security feed. The camera caught Alara in the elevator, her arms crossed, eyes empty, a shadow of the girl I remembered. Derek stood beside her, laughing with the clerk, all charm and counterfeit warmth. The plan shifted in my head instantly. This wasn't just manipulation, it was coercion. I needed proof. Sarah rerouted the property's audio logs, syncing them through our internal network. Every sound in their room streamed into a private channel. I sat in the dark of my office as the voices began. Derek's tone was casual, practiced. "You just have to say you had the baby. Caleb promised to clear my debt once the video goes live." Silence. Then Alara's voice, thinner than I remembered. "The baby never lived. I can't do this." A pause, and then Caleb's voice on speaker, sharp and cold. Then don't be surprised when your clinic record ends up on every feed from here to Boise. The words hit like glass breaking. For a second, I wanted to storm the hotel and drag them all into daylight. Jonas's message appeared at the edge of my screen before I could move. If you intervene, they erase everything. Stay still. I forced myself to breathe. The recording was still running. Let the damage finish forming. By midnight, the files were archived and encrypted. The folder name was Aster Truth T03. I watched the progress bar complete each percentage a heartbeat. Then Sarah called again. Your father hired a disbarred attorney from Charlotte used to forge birth certificates in an inheritance case. I leaned back, pressing my thumb against the glass desk until it hurt. Every piece fit. They were building a child from paper and lies in air who never existed. Jonas confirmed what came next. Silverline Media's internal notes showed a campaign called Day of Redemption, scheduled for the first day of the Avalon Summit. A perfectly timed resurrection. I almost admired the audacity. Almost. I sent an email that night from a dummy account under the name L. Corbin, the PR executive Jonas once mentioned. This campaign carries exposure risk. Need verification of source materials. Within hours, I received a full chain of attachments, scans, drafts, scripts. They didn't question it. They simply sent their crime gift wrapped. Sarah mirrored the files to our secure server and deleted the traces. The web was closing. The next evening, the security feed from Haven showed Alara alone pacing. Then at 12:47 a.m. she left. She appeared on my own office camera 40 minutes later, her face pale under the lobby lights. She didn't knock. She just walked in and threw a manila envelope onto my desk. This is the only copy left, she said. Inside was the original medical record from Idaho 2003, confirmation of pregnancy followed by the termination record signed by her, not by my parents. Proof that the story they were selling never existed. Her voice broke. If you still see me as a person, end it. She turned to leave, but I stopped her long enough to say, go. Get out of this city. They won't touch you again. When the door closed, I stood alone with the envelope, its weight heavier than any revenge plan. I sealed it in the safe, labeled Aster Truth, and called Jonas. He came in person that night to scan and notarize the file, storing duplicates across 3 jurisdictions. This is the cornerstone, he said quietly. Without this, they could have rewritten time. Outside, the sky bruised toward dawn. The office lights caught my reflection in the window. For the first time, the man staring back wasn't the boy left in the rain. He was someone colder, steadier, willing to burn everything down to reveal what had been hidden. An hour later, as I tried to close my eyes, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. Unknown number. The message appeared without a sender name. We know she came to you. Stop meddling or the world will believe you killed your own child. I stared at the screen until the glow dimmed. The threat didn't scare me. It only confirmed what I'd already decided. The next time they tried to use my silence, I'd let the entire world hear what it sounds like when the truth finally breathes. 2 days later, at 2 a.m, the office at Harlow Systems glowed like a cockpit. The rest of Asheville slept. Our servers didn't. I sat between Sarah and Jonas, the 3 of us lit by dashboards and terminal windows, the hum of the racks a steady breath behind the glass. We were combing through recent pushes when a new artifact popped into the quarantine queue, a document uploaded from a Silverline Media IP block scrubbed, but not enough. The file name looked like a Dare Family Reunion Plan.docs. Sarah opened it in a sandbox while I watched the cursor crawl. The contents were exactly what I expected, and worse, a timed program for Avalon Summit, lines of dialogue for a staged reconciliation, lower thirds graphics labeling me as a prodigal son, Caleb and Marilyn as long-suffering grandparents, and a closing shot of a child's silhouette under soft light. They had built a ceremony out of a lie. I said it out loud so the room would hear me mean it. I was going to control the stage before they did. The only way to end this was to use their own spotlight and make it tell the truth. Jonas began assembling a lean lethal packet, the notarized relinquishment from 2003 with the docket number that matched the public log, Ilara's Idaho clinic record scanned at high resolution, and certified the archived emails between my father and Derek about the payoff and the recorded threat where Caleb promised to expose her medical past if she didn't comply. Sarah wrote remote triggers that would let a single keystroke override the house playback system at the convention center. We didn't ask permission. We checked the contracts. Avalon's AV vendor already ran our fleet management pilot for their hotels. Astor had a maintenance channel baked into the projectors. I would be the one with access when the room went dark. I still sent the message my father needed to receive. I'm ready to speak about family publicly. His reply arrived minutes later, a warm paragraph about healing that felt printed before he typed it. While he pretended to plan a reunion, Sarah traced another change in their workflow. Silverline's engineers had pushed a block to intercept any media uploaded from my account and swap in their pre-cut video of a smiling boy. Sarah answered by moving the feed 3 layers down into a lane even their administrators didn't see. She was careful, relentless, and when she finished the playback, path looked like a river braided through rock. If they tried to dam it at one channel, 2 others would carry the current. Near dawn, my phone vibrated. A message from my father. Tomorrow we'll be a family again. You should be grateful. I pictured the watch on my mother's wrist, the way it had flashed in my hallway when I was 17 and again in my living room weeks ago, a metronome for someone else's control. 10 minutes later, Jonas called from his desk down the hall. He had been combing through a secondary archive at the Lane County Clerk's office, backups no one bothers to search because they're messy, and found a surveillance recording from inside the notary's suite 22 years ago. Grainy footage, static at the edges, clear enough in the middle to show my father and mother signing the document that cut me off. At the end, the steel watch on my father's wrist caught a rectangle of fluorescent light and threw it toward the camera, a shard of brightness any juror would remember. I printed a single frame of that reflection and set it beside the letter my mother had written. On one paper, a plea. On the other, a decision. I told Jonas if our plan was interrupted, if the feed was killed, if a fire alarm pulled the plug, he was to ship the entire packet to 2 outlets that still read before they posted the Austin Chronicle and the Wall Street Ledger. He didn't argue. He wrote a short cover letter and saved 2 drafts. We rehearsed a final time. My opening about trust and data. The cue where the Astor logo would appear. The handoff to Jonas, concise and brutal. The clip of Ilara's voice, no face, just truth. The still from the notary camera. The closing line I had written, the one that cost the most to say. When we finished, the countdown timer on the wall read 18 hours. I closed the laptop and said what the room already felt. Tomorrow the light goes where they're most afraid of it. On the way out, my phone buzzed again. A short video shot through a windshield, shaky and mean, Ilara's rental turning onto the interstate at dawn, a black SUV, 2 cars behind her. The file closed with a text. Don't play with fire. I stared at the highway markers flicking past in the footage, felt the familiar heat rise and let it burn out before it touched my hands. I forwarded the clip to Jonas and Sarah tagged it for the packet and turned off every light but one. The servers kept breathing. So did I. Nashville Convention Center held the kind of morning electricity you only get when 3,000 people are waiting for a show they don't know they're about to see. Cameras perched on rails, translators tested headsets, sponsors shook hands. I could feel the stage under my shoes like a living animal. In the 4th row, Caleb and Marilyn sat with their backs straight, Derek at the aisle, a Silverline producer, 2 seats down, tapping notes on a tablet. They had orchestrated an audience and dressed it in business casual. I walked out to white light and silence. The room swallowed my outline and gave me back as something larger. Good morning, I said, and talked about trust. I defined it the only way I knew, how something you can measure only when you've lost it. I spoke in clean phrases, no metaphors, numbers first then names. On the floor to my left, my father gave a small signal to a man in a headset. The tech crouched behind the booth, fingers arched over a keyboard. Somewhere in a control room, their reunion film waited for its cue. The main screen fluttered, then steadied. Astor AI's mark opened like an iris. A breath caught high in the hall. Instead of soft focus music and a boy who never existed, the picture cut to the timestamp of a small office in Eugene, 2003. The camera faced a laminate counter, a plant in the corner, a wall calendar turned to January. My father stepped into frame. My mother followed. A notary placed a document where the camera could see signatures if it cared to look. The room watched them write their names beneath a line that severed me from every legal claim a son has and every obligation a parent owes. At the end, as they stood to leave, the steel watch on my father's wrist flashed under fluorescent light and sent a white blade toward the lens. I let the freeze frame hold one heartbeat too long. Jonas joined me on stage with a folder and a microphone. He didn't introduce himself. He placed the certified copy of the relinquishment on the confidence monitor and read the docket number, then matched it to the public record. He tapped the chain of custody log for the Idaho clinic file and displayed the physician's attestation. The screen moved to email headers between Caleb and Derek discussing payment for participation and language for press. Finally, a waveform appeared, then Caleb's own voice played across the hall, flat and cold. Say it was born and hidden. If you don't, your record goes public. No adjectives. Just his voice verifiable and present. I said nothing until the clip of Alara's testimony filled the room. We didn't show her face. We didn't need to. The baby never lived, she said, her breath catching on the last word. They tried to make me lie. The sound alone rearranged the air. On the main screen, I brought back the still from the notary camera and pushed in on the watch, the hard shine angling toward the glass, like a second hand that had been waiting 22 years to be noticed. Then I looked down at the fourth row. My father raised a hand as if to push away light. My mother gripped the armrest until her knuckles whitened. Marilyn stood and shouted that it was fake. The sound engineer opened the next file without looking at me. Her own voice, captured in a kitchen with the phone too close to her mouth, filled the room from 2 decades ago. You killed your future. She fell back into her seat as if the floor had lifted. Derek lurched into the aisle and charged the stage, a tangle of nerves and entitlement. Security moved faster. In the scramble, his mic pack brushed live and caught the only sentence he said that mattered. You promised me 500 grand. It landed on the big speakers like an invoice. My father tried to stand and leave. The broadcast cameras, which were supposed to cut to sponsor logos, found his face instead. The room began to murmur, then hiss, then boo. I let the sound crest and settle. When it grew quiet, I spoke to the only people whose ears I cared about, the ones who had come looking for a product, and found a confession. You came to meet a child, I said, calm, because rage would have been too easy. But you made sure there would never be one. And as for me, the boy you threw out, I don't belong to you now. Not by law, and not by anything that calls itself love. The room held still for a beat so long I felt it in my teeth. Then the applause started near the back, moved forward like rainfall, and broke over the stage. Phones rose. Feeds went live. On the screens outside the hall, the tags began to bloom. A Trav Voss revealed who asked her truth. Within minutes, Silverline's main account went dark. Their producer slipped out a side door with his badge tucked into his pocket. I looked again at the fourth row. My father's head was bowed, my mother's mouth working around a word that wouldn't come. I closed the presentation where it had to end. Family isn't who shares your blood, I said. It's who doesn't leave you in the storm. The lights came up without music. I walked off stage into the service corridor, the concrete cool through the soles of my shoes. Jonas's phone rang before mine. He listened for a long moment, then covered the receiver and met my eyes. They just filed suit for defamation, he said. They intend to fight this in court. I took the call, waiting on my line, and heard the same message from another mouth. When it ended, I slipped the phone into my pocket and felt the smallest laugh threaten to rise. Not joy, relief. A courtroom at least had rules. Good, I said. Let's put the light somewhere it doesn't turn off. 2 weeks after the Avalon summit, the noise had finally reached a pitch where even the mountains could hear it. Every channel replayed the footage, my parents' faces under the lights, the reflection from my father's steel watch, the crowd's gasp when I said there was no child. Hashtag still pulsed across social feeds like a heartbeat that refused to die. I left Asheville behind and drove into the Blue Ridge to the cabin Maeve used to stay in during her quiet months. The place was small, paneled with cedar, the kind of silence that made you remember the sound of your own breathing. I hadn't turned on a TV in days. The only connection to the world was the gravel road and Jonas's black SUV that appeared every few mornings. That day he brought a folder thick enough to weigh down the kitchen table. The front read, Voss vs. Voss. Complaint for defamation, forgery, and invasion of privacy. Inside were stamped documents, neatly tabbed exhibits, and my parents' signatures clear and defiant as ever. Jonas opened his briefcase, laid out the response plan, and said the one thing he always did before a fight. We'll keep it by the book. They'll use chaos. We'll use law. Their legal team came from Charlotte, the same city where my father's disbarred attorney had once forged birth records. Irony, it seemed, was hereditary. The foundation of their case rested on one point, that the notary video shown at Avalon had been obtained illegally, a violation of private archive property. Sarah, who had been looping in from the city, already had the counter prepared. The footage had been transferred into public digital archives in 2003 when the state digitized its notary logs. Every frame was open source, accessible to anyone with a file number and patience. Jonas smiled. They're suing over a window they left unlocked themselves. We filed a countersuit the same afternoon. Fraudulent misrepresentation, PR deception, and fabrication of identity for financial gain. The headline was simpler: The Grandson That Never Existed. Jonas had written it that way for the press. The hearings began under gray skies. Reporters lined the courthouse steps. Every shudder sounded like a heartbeat I didn't want to own. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume and paper. Derek Sloan was the first to crack. The federal investigators had frozen his Cayman account and demanded an explanation for the $500,000 transfer. He gave it, Caleb Voss paid me. The words echoed off the courtroom's marble like the click of a lock opening. Then came the emails. Journalists obtained verified correspondence between Marilyn and Silverline Media showing an $80,000 payment for the Bring the Grandson Home campaign. The phrase itself became a meme, an emblem of manufactured grief. Their company collapsed within the week. When Caleb took the stand, his composure had already thinned. His business partners had pulled their investments. The real estate firm was declaring bankruptcy. He still tried to sound proud, speaking of legacy and family honor. Marilyn, sitting 2 seats away, trembled with a mixture of fear and vanity. But it was during her own testimony that the mask fell. When asked why they'd pursued the lawsuit despite clear evidence, she said quietly, almost to herself, "We only wanted our name back in the papers." The microphones picked it up. The moment aired live. Every screen in the hallway went silent. I sat behind the partition, unseen by the cameras, listening to her voice. It struck me that for 22 years I had defined myself by what they'd done, by the door they'd closed, by the rain I stood in, by the silence that followed. I had built my life as a rebuttal. Sitting there, I realized that fighting them had kept me tied to them longer than love ever could. Victory didn't feel like winning. It felt like stepping into an empty house. When the judge dismissed their claims with prejudice, Jonas leaned over and asked, "You want to pursue damages?" I shook my head. They already lost what they worship. Money can't touch that. Outside, the flashes of cameras washed the courthouse steps in strobe. I walked through them without looking up, the noise fading as the mountain road swallowed me again. That night, the post arrived late. A small envelope from Idaho stamped with the seal of the state hospital. Inside was a notice, medical record of patient E. Quinn, declassified per statute. Attached to it was a photocopy of a handwritten doctor's note dated 2003. Patient requested to keep woven cord bracelet as memorial. I sat for a long time holding the note against my chest. The bracelet, the same rough strand of fiber I'd kept in a small safe for years, wasn't a symbol of failure anymore. It was proof of survival. At dawn, I unlocked the safe, took out the bracelet, and laid it across my palm. I understood then that revenge doesn't quiet ghosts. It feeds them. The only way to end the noise was to forgive not for their sake, but for mine. To forgive the boy who once wished to become the monster they made him fear. That evening I opened my laptop and drafted a letter to the Maeve Foundation board. The subject line read, "Proposal Outreach for Disowned Youth." The body was simple. No child should stand outside their own home in the rain. Build something that keeps the lights on for them. I signed it without hesitation. When the wind moved through the trees, it sounded almost like applause. A year passed. Spring in Asheville returned like a long exhale. The dogwoods along the ridge bloomed pale against the clear sky, and the stream beside Maeve's old cabin sang the same tune she used to hum when she worked late. I lived quietly now, far from headlines. Harlow Systems thrived under Sarah's leadership, and I served only as a consultant, a name on documents, and nothing more. The Maeve Foundation had grown into what we dreamed, a network for young people thrown out of their homes, offering scholarships, shelter, a voice. Every grant signed carried Maeve's quote embossed at the bottom, "Family is who stays." The dedication ceremony was small. Jonas arrived in his gray suit, still smelling faintly of coffee and paper. Sarah brought a group of students the foundation had helped. They looked nervous, determined, alive. The hall was modest, a renovated barn overlooking the valley. At noon the doors opened and Alara stepped inside. She wore a loose linen coat, her hair pinned back, eyes steady but soft. In her hands was a wrapped canvas. When she pulled the cloth away, the room fell quiet. It was a painting titled "The Boy at the Door." A lone figure stood under rain before a house with no light, his face turned upward, not pleading, just waiting. She handed it to me and said, "It's how I remember it, so I can forget." I didn't answer. There were no words big enough. We just stood there, two survivors looking at the same storm from different shores. Later, during the reception, a journalist approached Jonas with a whisper that carried. Caleb Voss had died that morning of a stroke in Arizona. Marilyn had been moved to a nursing home outside Phoenix. The room shifted, the music stuttered, then continued quietly as if nothing had happened. Jonas found me by the window and handed me a folded clipping, an excerpt from Caleb's will released to the press. "If my son ever reads this, let him know I never understood him. I lost because I did not know how to love." I read it twice. My throat tightened, but not with grief. It was the first honest thing he had ever written, and it had arrived too late to matter. At dusk, I drove up the ridge with the bracelet in my pocket. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. On the summit, I built a small fire in the stone ring Maeve had used for her picnics. I held the bracelet between my fingers, the fibers rough and familiar, and fed it to the flame. The smoke curled upward, turning to ash that drifted west toward Oregon, toward the life that had started and ended there. "I'm not here to apologize," I whispered. "I'm here to live." When the fire died, I sat until the stars came out. Each one looked like a window that no longer scared me. In the months that followed, we launched the Foundation's mentorship program, pairing older survivors with teens who had nowhere to go. Every story I heard sounded like a version of my own: the slammed door, the silence, the long walk through rain. Each time I listened, the weight on my chest grew lighter. One evening, as the light faded, Sarah called from the city. "The new system's online," she said. "We need a name." I looked around the cabin. The lamp Maeve had left the shadows, leaning gently on the walls, the sound of water moving over stone. "Call it home," I said. The next morning, news of the system's success spread across our network. The name stuck. For the first time, the word didn't sting. It felt earned. I sometimes drive down into town on weekends just to see people walking under sunlight, to remind myself that ordinary peace is the rarest kind of victory. From time to time, I still hear my father's voice in memory, cold and commanding, and then I remember the silence that followed, the one that finally became my verdict. Family isn't the house that throws you out. It's the life you build when you decide to walk back toward the light. And when the truth is finally spoken aloud, even silence becomes both judgment and forgiveness. The first spring after the Foundation's launch passed in a blur of travel speeches and quiet evenings that felt both full and hollow. I had built something meant to outlive me, yet the silence inside that Blue Ridge cabin still ruled my hours. The Maeve Foundation had grown faster than any of us predicted. Sarah opened branches in Portland and Denver, and Jonas became the reluctant legal guardian of half the kids we helped. But every success carried the echo of that boy under the rain still watching through a window he could not open. Reporters came and went. They wanted the reformed prodigal, the man who turned trauma into triumph. They loved the symmetry of it, how the son of disgraced socialites became a savior for lost youth. None of them cared about the spaces between headlines, the sleepless nights, the second thoughts, the ghosts that refused to leave. I smiled, for the cameras said all the right things about hope, and went back to my cabin where the creek sounded like static from a life I couldn't switch off. It was in early June that the first letter arrived from Arizona. The handwriting was careful, almost timid. Kepler. If this reaches you, I'd like to talk before time runs out. I have something you were never told. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to finish what I started wrong. It was signed Marilyn. Jonas warned me not to answer. She's looking for absolution, he said. You don't owe her that. He was right legally and morally, but law had never been the measure of my life. I wrote back anyway, I'll listen once. No promises after that. 2 weeks later, I flew to Phoenix. The nursing home sat between a golf course and a desert highway, the kind of place built to make decline look respectable. I found her on a shaded patio, thinner than I remembered her hair, white eyes still sharp enough to find every fault. You came, she said, half smiling. You wrote? I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with the smell of sunscreen and artificial orange blossoms. She took a folded envelope from her cardigan. Your father wasn't your only ghost, she said. I was carrying one too. Inside was a photograph, Maeve younger by decades, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. The back read, Rodas and Voss Properties, 1981. She was our partner, once Marilyn said. Before you were born. Caleb and Maeve built that first hotel together. Then she discovered he'd stolen her design blueprints. She threatened to expose him. He made sure she couldn't. I looked at her, waiting for the rest. He didn't kill her, she said quickly. But he ruined her reputation, forced her out. That's why she left Eugene. That's why she built her chain from scratch. You were her second chance. The idea stunned me. My life, the rescue, the mentorship, the fortune had begun as someone else's unfinished war. Maeve hadn't just saved me, she had redeemed herself through me. And now Marilyn wanted to hand me this guilt like an heirloom. Why tell me now, I asked. Because she forgave you, she said, and I never could. I need to know how she did it. There was no answer to give. Forgiveness was a muscle Maeve had trained through pain. My mother had only exercised control. I left without shaking her hand. The last thing she said followed me to the car. Your father's name is gone, but his habits aren't. Don't let the foundation become another empire. Back in Asheville, the summer storms rolled in heavy and bright. Alara started visiting more often, helping coordinate the art therapy wing at the foundation's new campus. She had changed too, calmer, older, the anger in her face replaced by something like patience. One night as rain hammered the windows, she said, "They'll write you into history one way or another. Make sure it's the version you can live with." That week, a new problem arrived. A journalist named Rowan Glass requested access to the foundation's financials, claiming to investigate charitable mismanagement. His emails were polite, precise, too knowledgeable to ignore. Sarah ran background checks. Rowan was real, a freelancer with ties to Silverline's new parent company under a different name. The enemy had evolved. I met him in a cafe downtown. He was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed and certain of his story. "Mr. Voss," he said, "some of your donors are tied to former Voss Realty accounts. Care to explain?" I sipped my coffee. "Reclamation," I said. "People trying to make amends." He smiled. "Or launder a legacy." That night I stayed awake, going through spreadsheets. Jonas found no legal flaw, but perception was fragile. The foundation's funding could look like rebranding for the disgraced elite. And that was exactly what Silverline wanted, a shadow over our light. Days blurred into planning and counter-planning. Sarah traced the data trail to a shell firm based in Dallas owned by a trust managed by an unknown executor. But the IP logs told a different story, one access pattern repeated at odd hours from within our own servers. Someone inside was leaking. I refused to believe it until we traced the connection to a local terminal at the Foundation's art department. Ilara's office. My chest tightened. I waited until the building emptied and checked her system myself. The files were there, summaries of budgets, donor reports, private correspondence. But the metadata showed the login had come from a remote script piggybacking through her account. She was being used again. I didn't tell her immediately. I wanted proof. Over the next week, Sarah and I monitored every packet leaving our network. The signature we caught was unmistakable, a remnant of Silverline's old encryption format, the same used during the Bring the Grandson Home campaign. Someone from that world had infiltrated ours. The confrontation came on a humid August afternoon. The Foundation auditorium was packed for the summer gala. I was backstage when Sarah's alert pinged leak in progress. Source unknown. I scanned the crowd and saw a man near the bar holding a glass of water but not drinking it, Rowan. He nodded once and left through the side door. I followed. Behind the building, the air smelled of rain and exhaust. Rowan waited by his car phone in hand. "You built a beautiful story, Kepler," he said. "But stories end. Data doesn't." He showed me the screen and upload bar at 80%. "You think you're saving people, but you're just rearranging guilt. Same blood, new branding." I stepped closer. "Who's paying you?" He smiled. "Let's just say your father's mistakes fund more than ghosts. Some of his investors found new use for redemption." Sarah's voice came through my earpiece. "We can intercept if you stall him." So I did. I talked. About the boy under the rain. About the woman who gave me a roof. About truth being a slow kind of mercy. He hesitated long enough for Sarah to cut the connection. His phone went dark. When he realized, his expression shifted from arrogance to disbelief. "You'll never stop it," he said. "There's always another version of you waiting to fall." "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." He drove off without looking back. By dawn, Sarah confirmed the breach neutralized, but the damage lingered in me. The more I defended Maeve's vision, the more it looked like Caleb's empire, efficient, centralized, worshipped by the same press that once condemned him. I caught myself calculating public sentiment, managing perception like currency. It was everything my mother had warned against, and she had been right for the wrong reasons. A month later, Marilyn died. No will, no ceremony, no heirs. The nursing home called to ask if I wanted her possessions shipped or destroyed. I told them to send what was left. The box arrived 3 weeks later, light enough to carry in one hand. Inside were her wedding ring, an old Polaroid of me as a child, and a cassette tape labeled for Kepler, 1990. Jonas found an old player in storage. We listened together in the cabin. The tape hissed before her voice came through, young, confident, untouched by bitterness. She was singing. A lullaby I didn't remember, but my body did. The melody filled the room like a heartbeat returning to a body that had long forgotten warmth. When it ended, I realized forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a rhythm, a repetition, until the noise faded. After that night, I stopped avoiding the city. I started mentoring one of the Foundation's first graduates, a 17-year-old named Corin, who'd been thrown out for coming out to his pastor father. He reminded me of myself, too proud to ask for help, too angry to accept love. One evening after a workshop, he asked, "Does the anger ever go away?" I told him the truth. No, but it learns to live somewhere quieter. By autumn, the Foundation launched its digital archive, testimonies from young people across the country. We called it Project Home after the system Sarah and I built. It became our living memorial, a place where silence could finally speak without fear. Still, I kept the photograph of Maeve and my mother on my desk. It reminded me that redemption isn't born from purity, but from ruin, that every good thing I built stood on the debris of what they destroyed. Some nights I still heard Caleb's voice in dreams telling me I owed the Voss name something. I'd wake up, open the window, and let the mountain air remind me whose voice mattered now. Then one winter morning, a courier delivered a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of legal paper stamped with the seal of Voss Heritage Trust, a company long dissolved. The letterhead bore Caleb's signature but dated 3 months after his death. The text was brief: assets transferred per contingency clause to surviving son upon moral restitution. It included coordinates and abandoned property in Oregon, the first hotel he and Maeve had built together. Jonas read it twice. He hid something, he said. Probably another lie. Maybe, I said. But maybe it's a way to end it where it began. We booked flights for spring. I didn't tell Sarah or Alara yet. Some doors have to be opened alone. The flight into Oregon was quiet, the kind of silence that feels padded, suspended between altitude and memory. Below the forest, spread out like a map of everything I'd tried to forget: wet green valleys, the black ribbon of the highway, the fog curling through pine like breath. Jonas sat beside me reviewing legal printouts. I stared out the window and wondered what sort of man hides his truth in coordinates. The address led us past Eugene and another 10 miles east to a stretch of land bordered by fir trees and rusted wire. The sign on the gate had almost faded away, but you could still read it if the light hit right: Rodess and Voss Inn, Esther, 1981. The building itself was a skeleton: windows, boarded ivy crawling through cracks, air thick with the damp smell of time. Inside, everything had stopped mid-breath. Ledgers scattered on the reception desk, old keys hanging on a wall of hooks, a ledger still open to a page dated 1985. The last entry read, "Balance owed to M. Rhodes' settlement pending." The handwriting was Caleb's. Jonas broke the seal on the envelope. According to this, he said this property reverted to the trust after Maeve's departure. When Caleb died, it became yours. I laughed quietly. The man who destroyed her gets the last word after all. Maybe not, Jonas said, scanning the fine print. There's a clause here, a contingency he never triggered. If both founding parties were deceased, ownership transfers to any surviving heir of either upon moral restitution publicly proven. Moral restitution, I repeated. Avalon Summit. It took hours to search the offices. Dust turned every step into a sigh. In the back office behind a filing cabinet, we found a safe. The combination lay written on the reverse side of the old ledger page almost carelessly. Inside were 3 things: a box of undeveloped film, a stack of typed letters bound by a rubber band, and a single brass key. The letters were from Maeve to Caleb, written after she left Eugene. They weren't angry. They were patient. She spoke of rebuilding, of using what he taught her without the poison. In one, she wrote, "If you ever understand what love costs, give it back to the boy. He'll know what to do with it." The film contained images of the hotel during construction, Maeve in a hard hat, Caleb beside her, both laughing. On the edge of one frame, a shadow, I recognized my mother, younger, smiling as if she belonged there. The past had always looked like a wound. Now it looked like a moment that never healed because none of them knew how. The brass key fit the door to the east wing. Inside, dust coated everything except a wooden box sitting in the center of the room. On top was a note in Caleb's heavy script, to the son who was never meant to inherit the sins of his father. I opened it slowly. Inside was an uncut diamond wrapped in tissue, a single-page deed transferring ownership of the land to the Maeve Foundation, and a letter. Kepler. I never wrote apologies because I never believed in them. But I built this place with a woman who understood something I didn't, that creation outlives control. I took her dreams and called them mine. You've done the opposite. You've taken my name and made it something I could never have built. I don't ask forgiveness. Just use this place to undo what I started. C.V. Jonas exhaled. So he left it to her through you. Maybe he finally listened, I said. We drove back to town in silence. That night I sat at the motel desk and drafted a plan. The ruins would become a retreat center for the Foundation, a space for young people between worlds to rebuild themselves. I called Sarah at dawn. She didn't ask why, she just said, "Send me the schematics." Alara met us there a month later, her hair pulled back under a bandana, paint on her hands. She walked the halls without speaking, touching the cracked walls as though greeting old ghosts. In one corner room she stopped and looked at me. "You know, this place feels like a heartbeat," she said. like it's been waiting to start again. For weeks we worked with local crews, clearing debris, rewiring, repainting. Every nail driven into the wood felt like stitching skin back together. One evening, as the sun bled across the mountains, Ilara sat beside me on the half-built veranda. "You never told me what your mother said in the end," she whispered. "She asked how Maeve forgave," I said. "And I told her I didn't know. Maybe forgiveness is just the long road to understanding why you were hurt in the first place." Ilara nodded. "And did you not yet?" I said. "But I'm still walking." By autumn, the retreat opened. We called it the Rodas House. The first group arrived 10 young adults from different states, each carrying stories too heavy for their age. They cooked together, planted a small garden, built a library out of donated books. Sometimes I caught them laughing in the halls where echoes used to live. One night after everyone had gone to bed, I found a letter slipped under my office door. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Mr. Voss, my name is Rowan Glass. You remember me from Asheville. I was wrong about you. The story I thought I was writing wasn't yours, it was mine. I grew up in a house like yours. My father still won't say my name. Thank you for showing me that silence can end." I read it twice, then burned it in the fireplace. Not from anger, but from release. Some words don't need to stay on paper. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the roofs, softening the world. I spent evenings in the common room listening to the quiet hum of the heater and the laughter from the dorm wing. Sometimes Ilara would sit at the piano Maeve once loved and play the same lullaby from my mother's tape. The notes lingered in the rafters, warm and human. In March, Sarah brought news the foundation had been nominated for a National Humanitarian Award. I almost laughed. "Let them give it to the kids," I said. "They're the reason we're here." She smiled. "They already have more than that. They have home." One morning as I walked the property, I found Corin sitting by the fence sketching. He'd grown taller, steadier. "You going somewhere?" I asked. "College in the fall," he said, "on the foundation scholarship. Thought I'd leave a drawing here before I go." He handed me the sketch, a simple charcoal outline of the building light streaming from its windows. Underneath he'd written, "You gave the boy at the door a key." I watched him walk away down the gravel path until the fog swallowed him. The next day I packed a small bag and drove west to the coast. I hadn't seen the Pacific since before Maeve died. The air smelled of salt and cedar. I walked along the shore until my shoes filled with sand and my head with wind. There at the waterline I scattered the ashes I'd kept from that night on the ridge, the last of the burned bracelet. The tide took them without hesitation. I stayed until the sun sank and the horizon became a band of red. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched by the past. It wasn't forgiveness that saved me, it was continuation. The world had kept moving. I had finally caught up. When I returned to the Rodas' house, Jonas had left a small package on my desk. Inside was a pocket watch, its casing engraved with initials CV and a note found in the safe after restoration. "Thought you'd want to keep time your own way now." I wound it once and listened to the tick. It sounded nothing like my father's old steel clock. It was softer, irregular human. Spring arrived again. The hills turned green, the garden bloomed. On the anniversary of the foundation's founding, the alumni gathered in the courtyard, over 50 of them now. Some carried their children, some brought partners, all of them carried a piece of the place that had saved them. When the ceremony ended, I stepped to the edge of the crowd. The sky stretched wide and forgiving. I thought about Maeve, about Caleb, about the broken chain that somehow formed a circle. In my mind, I heard her voice, "Build yourself so strong they regret letting you go." I smiled. I did. I whispered. But I also learned to stay. As night fell, lanterns glowed along the path, one for every story that had found its way home. The wind moved through the trees, and for a heartbeat I could almost see the silhouettes of the people who had started it all. Maeve, Caleb, Marilyn standing at the edge of the light, watching, finally silent. I turned toward the house where laughter spilled from the open windows and felt something shift inside me, gentle and final. The past had stopped being a weapon. It had become a place of origin, no longer a scar, but a signature. And for the first time since that night in Eugene, I knew what peace sounded like. It wasn't silence. It was the sound of 100 voices calling one another home.